Bruce Gilden is a photographer from New York. He's quite famous amongst photographers, especially street photographers, and he's known mainly for two things. First, his aggressive style. He will just stand in a busy street in the middle of New York City and photograph people as they walk past using a flash gun. He does this without asking the subject's consent, and if requested to delete a photograph, he will often refuse. The second thing he's known for in his craft are his close-up photographs of people who have interesting visages. Some would say ugly faces, though Bruce Gilden himself would say the faces are interesting. A lot of photographers have a negative view of Bruce Gilden. They think he is aggressive and even a bully. They don't like that he never seeks consent for his street photography and disregards often the wishes of his subjects. My view of Gilden's work is positive, and this is partly because I'm a street photographer myself, but obviously I'm just a clumsy amateur bumbling around and nowhere near the level of Bruce Gilden, but I admire his work, and some of what I do is similar to what he does in technique, and this is also partly what drew me into watching auditing videos and then criticising and reviewing auditors and their work. I photograph people in the street, not always with their consent, and I'll go into the legality and ethics of that in a moment. So this similarity means you could say I'm a fan of his. If Bruce Gilden saw my work, he would tell me to throw it in the bin and give up photography. He's a very blunt and abrasive person as far as I can see, so I would not like to meet him, but I am an admirer of his work. What my positive view of Gilden boils down to for me is originality and authenticity. But in the case of Gilden, I need to qualify that because in this case, the authenticity has an artifice to it. By authenticity, I mean naturalness, but Gilden uses the flash gun to create an effect of apprehension or anxiety in the subject, reflecting the pressured nature of city life. I don't think that makes his work in any sense false. It is organic. It captures people naturally, including a natural reaction to in-your-face flash photography. It's sort of an interesting hybrid, a staged naturalism. And some people don't like close-ups of interesting faces, but I do, and I find them human and touching. I know that makes me sound simple, but there you are. There's always a thin line to tread because there's a risk that a photographer who is middle class is capturing faces and mores and habits in a way that could be implicitly judgmental or patronising. These are working class people, and I like it, and Bruce Gilden himself argues that he's giving these people a sort of cultural space, a voice, by putting their faces in the frame rather than the usual people. So what's the difference between, on the one hand, a street photographer like Bruce Gilden and at a humble level a photographer like myself, and on the other hand, an auditor? First, I'll explain a few more things about street photography. I'm not as aggressive or intrusive as Bruce Gilden in the way I photograph people, but the point still arises even in regard to myself, because some of my photographs purposefully capture specific individuals, rather than just incidentally capturing people in a wide-angle lens or something like that, and I may not always obtain consent. To explain the thinking behind that, here's an important further point that has to be made. In Bruce Gilden's defence, he is adopting this professional style with a camera and flash gun in people's faces in the middle of a bustling city street. I think some of his footage we're watching now is from a major thoroughfare of New York City. Obviously, my commentary has to be on UK data protection law, and the privacy law in England. So let's imagine that our context is a busy part not of New York City, but somewhere like Piccadilly Circus in London. Nobody seriously thinks that there can be some sort of public privacy in a location like that, and to even capture a close-up of a specific individual in that situation and location cannot be an infringement on privacy because the individual is unlikely to be considered identifiable. He's not in his home or at work. The location unlikely. The location does not time to his identity, nor can his face, because this is someone photographed in a busy place with hundreds or thousands of people walking through every minute. And so while he may resemble particular individuals, he could be anybody. Of course, in a way, what I'm arguing for is a legal fiction, because sometimes the individual will be identifiable photographically in a busy place, either because in fact he does work nearby or he's known for walking around there. We also have to control for other present factors. Let's say the individual is wearing work clothes, and let's say the work clothes are not of the routine or mundane variety, such as an office suit or a corporate uniform, but instead mark him out distinctively. A clerical collar, for instance. But what I've just outlined, anyway, is an explanation for why even the most aggressive and intrusive sort of street photography, such as that practiced by Bruce Gilden, need not actually amount to an infringement of privacy. But what happens when someone is identifiable in a street photograph? In other words, what happens when the capture and use of a street photograph amounts to processing personal data? There are two threads to this. There is data protection and there is privacy. The two are linked in that an action for privacy would be founded on a reasonable expectation of privacy, which in the context of photography would normally require that the photographer has captured either personal data or some sort of private information. So personal data is a good guide for us, and that's why we'll start by looking at data protection, because that's where we define personal data. Indeed, personal data is defined in Article 4 of the UK GDPR as information which is identifiable of a natural person or identifies such a person. It's important to bear in mind that when it comes to data protection, photographers in the UK will typically be availed of a special purposes exemption for journalism or artistic activity. Here are the things the photographer is exempt from. First, 5 of the 6 data protection principles set out in Article 5 of the UK GDPR, including the principles that the subject's data, i.e. the photograph, should be processed fairly, lawfully and transparently. The photographer does not have to have a lawful basis for his photography and for taking a photograph of someone, and does not need their consent. The requirement that the photographer should comply with certain conditions when processing with consent are also exempted. Another exemption is from the restrictions on processing certain sensitive private data, such as criminal records. The photographer is also exempt from the requirements to inform the data subject that he cannot be identified from the data held by the photographer. The photographer does not have to provide information to the data subject, such as his name and address, or why he is doing what he's doing, and so on. Nor does he have to provide such information where the personal data has been obtained from a third party. Nor does he have to confirm to a data subject that he is processing his personal data. Nor does he have to offer a data subject a right of erasure or right of rectification. There is no right for the data subject to restrict processing where the data is inaccurate or processing is unlawful, or an objection to processing has been lodged. There is also no requirement on the photographer to notify anyone who has received the personal data of an erasure or rectification of the data or a restriction placed on processing. There is no right to data portability, which means a data subject can't require that the photographer as data controller transfer the data elsewhere. There is also no right to object to and halt processing in cases where the data subject has asked the data controller, being the photographer, to justify the data processing on the basis of some lawful basis contained in the UK GDPR. And there is no requirement on the photographer to notify the data subject of a data breach. There are also some other exemptions which include that there's no requirement on the photographer to consult with the Information Commissioner's Office about high-risk data processing, and no requirement on the photographer to comply with the requirements for data transfers to third countries. But all of that does not give a blanket exemption from the Data Protection Act, and it's also the case that photographers can face an action for privacy in the civil courts for breach of someone's privacy. So even with the special purposes exemption, whether for journalism or artistic work, there are still some requirements that have to be met. In regard to the Data Protection Act and the UK GDPR will go through what the remaining requirements are, even with the exemption. There is still a right for the data subject to restrict what the photographer does with an image if he decides to bring a legal claim against the photographer. There is a right for the data subject not to be subjected to automated decision making. There is a right for the data subject to object to the use of his image in marketing. There's a right to complain to the Information Commissioner. The photographer still also has to adhere to most of the duties and obligations of data controllers contained in Articles 24 to 43 inclusive of the UK GDPR, which are fairly technical provisions concerning how data is held and protected. But he is exempt from some of these, as just mentioned. And the photographer still has to register as a data controller even though he is availed of the special purposes exemption, a very important point. And finally, one of the data protection principles in Article 5 of the UK GDPR does still apply, which is a requirement to store data securely in Article 5.1f. If Bruce Gilden was carrying out his photography on the streets of the UK, he would have to consider all of this. None of this applies to myself because I'm an amateur, I don't receive payment, so I'm availed of the domestic purposes exemption in Recital 18 of the UK GDPR. That, however, does not put me in the clear. Just like any other photographer, whether amateur or professional, as I've mentioned, I can still be sued for breach of privacy. In England and Wales, common law applies the right of privacy under Article 8 of Schedule 1 to the Human Rights Act 1998, which itself is an area of law that branched out from a more long-standing right of privacy that has existed in English law for a very long time and is known as the duty of confidence. In the 2004 case of Campbell and MGN Limited, the House of Lords looked at a privacy dispute between the model Naomi Campbell and Mirror Group newspapers. The Mirror newspaper had published a photograph of Naomi Campbell outside an addiction clinic. Campbell sued for breach of confidence, and ultimately the case was decided in her favour after the House of Lords applied Article 8 and in doing so modified the law on privacy in domestic English law. Two important points come out of the Campbell and MGN case. First, the Campbell and MGN case reinforces my point about the importance of the surrounding context when deciding whether something is personal data and therefore private. Had she been photographed on a busy shopping street, she might not be recognised in the photograph or video, and even if she were recognised, it's not really a breach of her privacy as such, and it's not usually considered personal data, or in this case just private information, because she can't have any reasonable expectation of privacy in such a situation. Of course, this is a kind of legal fiction, because it's obvious that you could recognise a famous person in a public place, but we should also bear in mind that even a famous person would not necessarily be readily identifiable from such a photograph. Let's face it, if you walked past a famous person in the street, you may well not recognise them, and part of the reason you may not recognise them is due to the context in which you are situated. You're in a public place where you're going about your own business, and your brain isn't switched on to recognising an important or famous person, which could require heightened attention to the specific individual. By contrast, if you're in a place or situation where you expect a famous person to be, either a specific individual or famous people in general, your sense for recognition are heightened to that possibility. But in this case, the Mirror photographed her at a sensitive location to which she could be tied, and that would lead us to identify her if we saw the photograph, provided we had certain other background information. It could have been her home or place of work. As it happened, it was an addiction clinic, and this was in the wake of stories about her addiction problems in the Mirror. So the story itself and the photograph were an infringement on her privacy. The second point that comes out of the Campbell and MGN case is that the judges in the House of Lords spoke of a margin of appreciation that the editor of a newspaper had before an intrusive story might cross an imaginary line and become a breach of privacy. This is another legal fiction. What we're saying is, even though something might breach someone's privacy, there's a degree of leeway that the courts can allow or condone in the interests of free expression under Article 10. It's within that margin of appreciation that intrusive street photographers such as myself often have to work. It's a legally grey area sometimes. If I photograph some person in a surrounding context that suggests privacy, then I have to justify it if I'm challenged about it. This amounts to mere common sense. What helps is something in the UK GDPR. Although, in the case of privacy law, we're not specifically dealing with data protection, and photographers, as I've mentioned, are availed of the special purposes exemption, and in my case also the domestic purposes exemption. Nevertheless, it can help to consider Article 6.4 as a guide to photographers as to whether or not there is likely to be a breach of privacy. Because Article 6.4 states that where data processing is carried out without consent, then the data controller must consider these points. Any link between the purposes for which the personal data has been collected and the purposes of the intended further processing. Next, the context in which the personal data has been collected, in particular regarding the relationship between data subjects and the controller. Third point, the nature of the personal data, in particular whether highly personal and private information is being captured, such as information about health or criminal convictions, etc. Next point, the possible consequences of the intended further processing for data subjects. And finally, the existence of appropriate safeguards, which may include encryption or pseudonymization. My original question was, what is the difference between a street photographer and an auditor? Well, now we've gone into some of the law, let's take a look at the recent work of an auditor, namely Mr. Blagborough. Here he is back in Leeds city centre.
Don't know what businesses are here, but we are definitely about to find out, guys. So we have, let's have a look. Right, we have solicitors firm, Great Thornton, FDM. Does that say Womble Bond?
I think so.
Womble Bond. And something else. Womble Bond. That's a funny looking name, isn't it?
Yeah.
Womble Bond.
Yeah.
He's taken a note of the businesses in the building. That will be important to us later. It's likely that the area he stood on is private land because it's within the immediate frontage of a large office building by the riverside, and typically that will be off the public highway.
Womble Bond, Womble Bond. We've got an admin office just over here. This lady here must be an just receptionist.
Receptionist?
Yeah.
It's round here.
CCTV in operation. There's his little number there.
That's the reception area.
Yeah.
It's not occupied. All the curtains are down.
We've got some. I think we've got some stuff around here as well. We'll have a look.
That chair's big. That chair's big enough for me, isn't it?
Just to emphasise that the blurring you see throughout all of this is mine, not Marti Blagborough's. As usual, Mr. Blagborough has made no attempt to protect the privacy of the people he films. He's filming things that aren't his business and in which there's no obvious interest, such as a back office and an ordinary building reception. He also, as you can see, zooms in on the receptionist. It's not clear to me what the purpose of all this is. I'm not suggesting he shouldn't be able to film the inside of a commercial building, even if he is stood on private land. It's trespass, and when he puts his camera lens to the window like that, it's definitely trespass. But at the moment, he hasn't caused any disruption or intimidated anybody as far as I can see, so it's not aggravated trespass at this point. And as long as he's filming a part of the interior that isn't sensitive, it's not so bad what he's doing here, but I'm finding it difficult to accept he has an artistic purpose. This is an important question because if we are to apply the special purposes exemption to Marti Blagborough's activity, which would relieve him of most of his data protection obligations, there must be either a journalistic or artistic purpose to what he's doing. Is there a journalistic purpose to it? Do the media typically go around filming the reception areas of offices for no reason? If I buy a newspaper or go to a news website, would I expect to find articles saying things like, This is a reception area of a Leeds insurance office, and here's a receptionist, and she bought a lollipop a few minutes earlier, and here she is reading a women's magazine, and this is where they keep all their office supplies. Is this important information for the public? Alternatively, maybe there's some artistic purpose to this. I'm not clear what it could be though, but to be fair, photographers do take an interest in fairly mundane things. It's just that this is the inside of a private building. The receptionist's face is filmed while she's at work, so it's personal data as defined in Article 4. Marti Blagborough is processing data for money. He's required to register as a data controller, which he still hasn't done. As I've just explained, there's no journalistic purpose to what he's doing. Is there an artistic purpose to it? I don't believe so. Let me explain why. In order for Marti Blagborough to argue that what he's doing is for an artistic purpose, he first has to reasonably believe that publication of this filming is in the public interest. Second, he has to think that the rights and duties that he would otherwise be subject to without the exemption must hinder the artistic purpose of his work. In regard to the first point, I don't see a public interest in what he does. He may argue, as he does later in this same footage, that he is, I'm quoting him now, flexing his rights, but it is not his right to go onto private land and film like that. It may be that there would be no real harm in it if he took certain steps like blurring out people's faces, but he hasn't. So if we are to accept that he has an artistic purpose in which the public interest is found, then we have to accept that this purpose should override the abuse of other people's rights. I find that hard to accept given his evident attitude and the standard of his work. It's not as if he's a serious photographer or journalist. He's just doing this for money at the end of the day. If he has a point to make about public photography rights, he can do it on the public highway, or if he wants to do this on private land that's publicly open, then he can blur out people's faces. Blurring out faces would not hinder his work, which addresses the second point. I don't mind Marti Blagborough using photography to make a point, but in doing so, he has to respect the rights of others and consider how to balance those rights with his own. Otherwise, what point is he trying to make? Maybe if there was a more obvious photographic purpose to what he was doing, and he also took steps to protect privacy, then what he's doing could be seen as more condonable. Steps could include blurring faces because there may be clients and customers there, and the receptionist, would she have expected to be filmed while she's on reception? The land is still accessible to the public, and there doesn't seem much harm to me in him walking up and filming a public area inside the building, such as reception, but my point is that he's doing it without much regard, or really without any regard, for considerations of privacy and commercial confidentiality. As matters stand, I think Marti Blagborough in these activities is subject to the full duties and obligations of a data controller. As I explained in a previous video, companies are availed of a right of privacy in Article 8 of the Human Rights Act 1998, which we have to consider as well, which means that what he's doing here would seem to be at least to put him at risk of a civil claim for breach of corporate privacy, as well as breach of the privacy of the individuals caught on film.
Got a guy chilling on Facebook here. We'll get behind him a bit.
They've got standing desks.
Yeah.
They ain't got the movable ones, but they've got standing desks.
It's on his emails.
Again, Marti's filming inside the office and potentially capturing personal data and confidential information. Bear in mind he stood on private land and is trespassing already. If what is on those screens is personal data, then the business occupant is also in breach of its obligations, including Article 5.1f of the UK GDPR and Section 40 of the Data Protection Act 2018, which state the principle that data must be processed securely, and also in breach of various obligations of the data controller in Articles 24 to 43 inclusive of the UK GDPR and Sections 57 and 66 of the Data Protection Act 2018.
This looks quite cool, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Thumbs up. Good lad, good lad. We like a bit of humour. What else have we got?
Some guy back there is,
What else have we got over here?
having a laugh.
I've left that last bit unblurred so that you can see Marti Blagborough attempting to zoom in on the information on the screen, which again shows he has no regard for the commercial confidentiality of the occupant business or the privacy of its clients and suppliers and whatnot. The behaviour of the two staff members captured there isn't much better. But there again, they didn't ask for this idiot to turn up at their premises.
I need to get my S23 Ultra back big time.
And we've got a Karen.
Actually, alright, they're alright.
They use that word Karen, which I think is a bit embarrassing and offensive, really. It shows a level of contempt when, in reality, if you were working and somebody was sticking a camera in the window and filming you, especially if that person was just a stranger, you would be concerned. Again, notice he's putting his camera to the window. That makes what he's doing definitely trespass, even if it turns out that he's stood on the public highway, which is unlikely anyway, as he's well within the frontage of a building.
Got some more over there. What's going on? Give us a wave, guys.
Go on, give away.
He's on the phone.
I don't think I need to elaborate on the pure idiocy of this, really, and he isn't even blurring out any faces. It's an actionable breach of the privacy of the company if the occupant business is incorporated, and it's an actionable breach of the privacy rights of each and every individual captured here. In case there's any doubt about that latter point, let's just go back and remind ourselves of what Marti Blagborough told us at the outset of the footage.
Guys, so we have... Let's have a look. Right, we have.
He then proceeded to read off the names of the business occupants, which means that anyone watching the footage with the unblurred faces can potentially tie those people to their place of work, which makes this unquestionably identifying information as defined in Article 4 of the GDPR, which in turn makes this an actionable breach of privacy in English common law due to Article 8 of the Human Rights Act.
Phone.
Oh dear, Karen, give away.
Somebody mentioned Karen again. Somebody inside this office is waving back at them. 2 or 3 of the staff have reacted positively, but we can't take that as implied consent to film, as they don't necessarily know this is going on social media or that Marti Blagborough is being paid to do this. So it's not them giving consent to Marti Blagborough to process their data.
These guys are pleasant, man. We like these guys. These are all pleasant. They're all waving. They're saying hello.
That's a lie from Marti Blagborough. They are not all waving. One of them has waved, and it's clear from their faces that some of them are uncomfortable being filmed, and some of them haven't actually even noticed they're being filmed.
Yeah.
They're just doing their job and then just carrying on with their day, thinking...
Say hi, Mum, I'm on camera. Hey, Mum.
Here Marti Blagborough zooms in on the face of a lady office worker, and she looks puzzled and uncomfortable with what he's doing. He then insults her.
Oh, don't frown like that. It stops you being like a 1 out of 10. It puts you down to a 0, love.
Bear in mind he's filming her at work and has made no attempt to blur her face. She does laugh, but it looks like a nervous laugh to me, and bear in mind also that these people have not been given a choice about being filmed in their workplace like this, and just because they wave or laugh, it doesn't follow that they're happy about it. They may be equally nervous about how it would look if they tried to evade the camera, but some captured her do try to do so.
Yeah. Who have we got here? Is that you? What's your name? Where are you from? What's ASL? Age, sex,
ASL.
location.
Age, sex, location, yeah.
Oh, come on, get a better photo. Hello, get a better photo.
We've got beard, man. Stroke that beard. Yeah, that's it. Stroke that beard.
Another zoom close-up there from Marti Blagborough as he discusses that man with a beard.
I am beard man. Dun, dun, dun.
I think we've got a Karen coming out.
I hope so.
Karen coming out.
I hope so.
We'll have a couple of them, mate. That's fine.
What's going on, mate? Dude, help me, dude, please.
Is Marti Blagborough mentally ill or something? What is it with this beard man thing? What? They keep mentioning Karen, it's like being in a drinking game. Anyway, some of these people are clearly uncomfortable with being filmed. They are now being challenged by security.
Yeah, man.
What are you doing?
Huh?
What is it though? What is it though?
It's a phone.
For what for?
You can use it to either make phone calls
What are you
or...
recording for?
Oh, because I wanted to do that today.
What are you filming, if you don't mind me?
Honestly, anything that we can see, as much as anything that we can see.
The security men are entitled to ask them pretty much anything they like, just as anybody is. And it so happens that since Marti Blagborough is not availed of the Special Purposes Exemption in the Data Protection Act 2018, and he is capturing personal data, including now the personal data of these security staff, he does have to comply with Article 12(1) and Article 13 of the Data Protection Act 2018 and give his name and address, his purpose for processing data, and his legal basis for doing so. I don't believe he's giving out adequate information so far.
In terms of what are you filming into office?
Yes, everything that I can physically see, that's what I'm trying to record.
I see, and why are you doing that?
Genuinely, just because that's what I want to do today.
I see.
Again, that is not a statement of a clear purpose from Marti Blagborough. If Marti Blagborough were a journalist or a photographer, he would normally state as much. He would say that he is a photographer recording footage for his own business purposes, or he is a journalist who has a story and needs to record that business. A journalist would typically give that information unless he had a reason not to, and we as viewers would know what that reason is. We know he's neither a photographer or a journalist, so instead he's just doing it because he wants to.
Interesting.
It can be very interesting, you know. Very things that happen when you point cameras at people. Oof, oof.
Yeah.
That's true, and there's nothing wrong with pointing at someone to get a reaction and to capture that reaction. That's street photography. It's not always comfortable, but Marti Blagborough is not a photographer. He's just a troublemaker.
You got jobs?
And why do you?
How much do you reckon YouTube pays someone on, let's say, 100,000 views? How much do you reckon revenue that generates?
What?
100,000 views on YouTube, how much revenue do you think that generates?
You're using big words.
I know.
You're doing it for, you're doing it for YouTube.
I'm guessing you're not.
You said, have you got a job? We make YouTube videos, that is my career. I have a limited company and I make a substantial amount of money for putting people on camera. Mainly the people who don't want to be on camera, they make more money.
Marti Blagborough does not have a limited company. That is another lie. That's the first point. Second, at the time of making my video, Marti Blagborough has 868 videos on his channel. Of those, exactly 10, that's 10, have more than 100,000 views. And 9 of those are years old. His channel has been around for some 8 years, and the most popular videos are from about 4 or 5 years ago, give or take. He does have maybe another 10 or so videos that have around 70 to 90,000 views. None of his recent videos on the channel from the last 12 months have anywhere near 100,000 views, with the exception of one video. The point I'm making is that he's lying again. The only truthful thing that comes out of his mouth in that exchange is that he's now told them he's on YouTube, but he hasn't told them who he is, of course.
Mainly the people who don't want to be on camera, they make more money.
His job is
Yeah.
with J.K. Rowling.
Fucking hell, a pair of glasses, he'd be spot on, wouldn't he?
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, Daniel.
Daniel Ratcliffe.
So, I don't get it.
Oh my
Mate,
God.
we're making videos
Right.
and to get interactions like this. Then we post it on YouTube and we get paid for ad revenue. Simple as that.
That, to me, from Marti Blagborough, is an honest and accurate summary of what he does and what he is. He's not a photographer, except in a very functional sense, and he's not an artist. He's filming to generate confrontation and broadcast it for money. I commend Marti for his honesty.
Channel called?
Marti B, M-A-R-T-I space B. It's actually Blagborough, but I'll come up top answer.
It's what, sorry?
M-A-R-T-I space B, and you'll see top answer.
I'm surprised at what we've just heard there. To give Marti Blagborough credit, he's giving them his name and the means for them to find his channel. That's the first time I've ever seen an auditor do that. I'm not surprised he wouldn't normally give out such detailed information, even though he's supposed to, because obviously then his victims would submit privacy complaints to YouTube and the video would be taken down. And that may well happen with this video. But Marti has a plan in place for when that happens. Let me explain. Here's what happens when a business that's been visited by Marti Blagborough puts in a complaint. You may remember this.
With us,
You were pressing your phones up to the window.
yeah.
and
Yeah.
people are trying to work.
Pressing his camera up to the window to film. That sounds familiar.
We've asked you what you were doing here. We asked you to tell us what was going on. You decided not to tell us that.
Do you want me to tell you what we're doing?
I'd love to know.
We're conducting something that is commonly referred to as a public photography audit. So we're just testing your response and seeing if our rights to record in a public place with anything that our eyes can see. And yeah, you're failing miserably. And it'll go on YouTube, and then the public will probably leave the company like a couple of 10,000 negative reviews on Google, inundated with phone calls for weeks on end and stuff like that.
Let me see if I've got this straight. You've decided to test our public photography rights by trespassing, harassing, annoying and pestering people on purpose, and you think that you are helping defend our rights by doing this, and you think it is acceptable to encourage your viewers to leave malicious reviews for innocent businesses just because those businesses don't want you to engage in this stupid, criminal and counterproductive activity.
So do you belong to a company?
I have my own limited company, yes.
Right, okay. What's the name of that?
I'm not going to tell you that.
Marti Blagborough does not have his own limited company. His company was dissolved and has been dissolved for almost 18 months. Marti Blagborough is a liar and he's a bully. The reason I wanted to show you that video again is because that business then submitted privacy complaints from their staff against Marti Blagborough to YouTube, obviously. YouTube then took the video down, and Marti Blagborough then re-uploaded the video. Marti Blagborough has now re-uploaded that same video several times after YouTube have blocked it several times, and on only one occasion has he actually edited the video in response to a privacy complaint, and even then he hasn't managed to blur out the lady's face. It still shows, which just demonstrates that he doesn't take people's privacy seriously at all. And YouTube have taken no further action against him, and I should add, this is a common practice amongst auditors. They all do it. They all re-upload videos following a privacy block, usually without making any changes to the video, which means, as far as I'm concerned, YouTube are complicit in the abuses this man and other auditors are committing. Just to be clear, there is nothing wrong with re-uploading a video following a privacy block. I've done it myself, but when I did it, I made sure that I addressed what I believed to be the privacy complaint. The privacy complaint against me from DJ Audits was a load of rubbish, but even so I addressed it by editing the video, and I have now done that twice. Marti Blagborough has made no changes or edits whatsoever before re-uploading that video on several occasions, with the exception of the change I just mentioned, which wasn't even effectively a change anyway. Which means there are no blurred faces. He has no respect for anyone or for the dignity or privacy of anyone he films. He deserves everything that is coming to him. Let's go back to my commentary on the other video.
See yourself on there probably next week time or something.
Okay.
But you've been good, so I don't think people will hate you.
What watches then?
Currently, on average, 280,000 people a week.
That's another lie from Marti Blagborough. He does not receive anything approaching that number of viewers. It might have been true maybe 2 or 3 years ago when his channel was at its height. Today he's lucky if he gets 50,000 views in a week, and I would say even that's generous, and those will not be unique viewers, just views, and the comments under his videos are far fewer in number than maybe 2 or 3 years ago. In case you don't believe me, just go to the main content page on his channel, linked in the description, and look at the videos for the past 7 days. You can also look his channel up on Social Blade, and you'll see that over the last 30 days he has had around 170,000 views. It may be more by the time you see this video, and that equates to something like 42,500 views a week, and I think that's generous. His channel is definitely in decline, and when you think about it, he's been around as an auditor and general troublemaker for some 8 years, yet at today's date, the 23rd of October 2023, he only has 53,000 subscribers. You'd expect it to be more like 100,000 or somewhere close to that.
Right.
There or thereabouts.
What's the kind of content that they watch then?
This interactions, public photography.
Alright.
See if
What's the interaction to it then?
I suppose it's about your rights, yeah. So you flex your rights, saying goes, use them or you lose them.
You're not flexing our rights, you're jeopardising our civil liberties and abusing our rights. My particular interest in this is that this idiot is potentially jeopardising my rights as a photographer, and at the very least, he's potentially making my hobby harder and less enjoyable. So far, I've not experienced any significant consequences, but I can see where this could go if it doesn't stop.
So we're just going about today, filming everything that we can, because that's our right to do so, and then we see how companies, security, police respond to that.
You can film everything you see if you want, but if you do that and you take that attitude that you have the right to do that, then at some point you're going to get yourself into trouble. Anybody with the remotest ounce of common sense should be able to appreciate that you shouldn't film everything you see anyway.
And then some people come out and say, oh, you're not allowed to record that, it's illegal, we'll educate them on the law.
You'll educate them on the law? That's a laugh. Are you a comedian as well?
And sometimes the police get called and then the police have to educate the security, which is pretty embarrassing for the security, isn't it?
He's self-important, isn't he? And he likes embarrassing people, doesn't he? But he doesn't like having the finger pointed at him on my channel. I hope these videos give some comfort to the people who have been victimised by this attention-seeking idiotic yob.
And people love watching it, man, it's hilarious. But we
like a good YouTube channel.
yeah, we don't mean no harm. We just, yeah.
You don't mean no harm. I don't accept that. I think you do mean harm, and you have even tried to do harm to me. You are a malicious individual, and that is borne out from your behaviour.
We're like professional nosy bastards. That's all we are. Proper nosy little buggers, that's what we are.
You can be nosy. The question is one of whether there's a purpose to it that could justify the intrusion and any abrogation of someone's privacy. If there isn't such a purpose, then you may expect some comeback, even legal comeback.
But that's what we like to do.
The two security guards, shouldn't they be asking them to stop filming through the window? You can see that Ryan Rampage has got his lens on the window, again in itself a trespass. I'm not sure why the security guards aren't speaking to them about that or trying to at least ask them to stop.
He's not what's on a rampage.
He's not shy.
That's me.
Yeah, what is it then?
You've got a channel as well.
Just like saying. It's merchandise.
He's on a rampage.
So not only do I get clicks through from YouTube, I get people buying this merchandise. So
Interactions apparently.
And everything that we could see.
It's fucking brilliant, it is, yeah, spot on. Proper winner, go on, back inside.
They haven't seen the amount of money.
Let's do a quick legal roundup of Marti Blagborough audits. First, he's not availed of the Special Purposes Exemption, which means that the UK GDPR and the Data Protection Act 2018 apply to him fully, yet he's not even registered as a data controller despite being required to do so. Second, he's not compliant with data protection. His breaches of the data protection regime are numerous because he has completely disregarded his obligations in that area, so far as I can tell. As for privacy law, he also breaches the privacy of both the company and individual staff in this video and frequently on other visits. Third, he has now lied in at least 3 videos I have seen about having a limited company. I must assume he's been telling this lie to others. I'm not clear for what reason he's lying about that, what he gains by doing so, whether it's just because he's a nut, but it may be that there's some nefarious agenda or purpose behind the lie to do with his legal obligations to someone somewhere. Is it an offence for him to lie about that? In these circumstances, probably not, because there's nothing that anyone could place reliance on as a result of a lie. But unless we know why he's lying, it's hard to say for sure. He's committing trespass, and in my view he commits aggravated trespass in this video because his trespass causes intimidation and disruption, and this is an offence contrary to section 68 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994. I also think in this video he commits criminal harassment contrary to section 1A of the Protection from Harassment Act 1997. He also commits an offence of unlawful obtaining of personal data without the consent of a data controller, contrary to Section 170 of the Data Protection Act 2018. That's because he was trespassing and even committing an aggravated trespass and harassment when he captured personal data. I don't believe he can argue an Article 10 defence to any of this because the rights in Article 10 are subject to law, and he confirmed that his purpose is not journalistic or artistic.
Mate, we're making videos and to get interactions like this, and we post it on YouTube and we get paid for ad revenue. Simple as that.
It may be that he has some sort of defence under Article 8.2 of the Human Rights Act, but again, I don't believe he does. Article 8.2 provides that or permits a public authority such as a court to permit an interference in privacy to the extent necessary in a democratic society for the protection of rights and freedoms. But Marti Blagborough is not acting in accordance with the law. What he does is not necessary in a democratic society for the promotion of rights and freedoms. There are other ways of carrying out even auditing which would not involve an infringement of the rights of others, or would at least minimise any infringement of such rights. When done in the way that Marti Blagborough carries out auditing, it's really just about gratification, and the disrespect of the rights of others forms part of that gratification for Marti Blagborough and his viewers. All of this is a world away from Bruce Gilden, who famously stands in the middle of a New York street and photographs passers-by with the aid of his flash gun. But he doesn't have their consent any more than Marti Blagborough does, so we're still left asking, what's the difference between the two? First, unlike Marti Blagborough, a UK version of Bruce Gilden would be availed of the Special Purposes Exemption for either journalism or artistic work, or both. This means, amongst other things, that the photographer does not have to demonstrate a lawful basis for his activities in the realm of data processing, and he doesn't require the consent of data subjects. However, he would still be subject to privacy law and the potential action for breach of privacy. Yet if you examine Bruce Gilden's work, his photographs are either close-ups taken with the consent of the subject, or they are impromptu street photographs taken without consent but in a situation in which privacy could not be reasonably expected. Turning to Marti Blagborough, since he's not availed of the Special Purposes Exemption, and since he does not have the consent of the people he photographs, he has to consider in full Article 6 of the UK GDPR, starting with Article 6.1, which sets out other possible lawful bases for his activities. The only basis other than consent would be legitimate interest in Article 6.1f, but even if we accept he does have a legitimate interest, this has to be balanced with the legitimate interest of the people he photographs in maintaining their privacy. And he is trespassing and not blurring their faces in his videos when in fact he could, and his general attitude is one that suggests he thinks he can do what he likes. Marti would also have to consider Article 6.4, which I mentioned earlier. Just to remind you, Article 6.4 requires the data controller to take into account certain points where processing is on any lawful basis other than consent. Going back to those points, all of these are relevant to Marti Blagborough and they are interlinked, and each point follows on from the last one. Article 6.4a requires the data controller to consider any link between the purposes for which the personal data has been collected and the purposes of the intended further processing. That is relevant here because Marti Blagborough is collecting personal data for broadcast, and his method of collection is designed to expose and leave the data subject vulnerable for the entertainment of his audience, indeed for the gratification of his audience. In view of this, I would expect a responsible data controller to consider carefully the next point, Article 6.4b, which addresses the context in which the data is being collected. Article 6.4b requires the data controller to consider context, in particular regarding the relationship between data subjects and the controller being Marti Blagborough. In the case of a video we've just seen, the context is their place of work, which is an office, which is not a place where somebody would reasonably expect to be filmed by an outsider without some sort of expressly given consent and advance notice, or at least implied consent. Article 64C requires us to consider the nature of the personal data. Here the personal data is identifiable information about data subjects in the form of their faces, in a context in which someone can see the name and location of their place of work. That clearly infringes on their privacy and is socially sensitive data. That leads us to Article 64D, which asks the data controller to consider the possible consequences of the intended further processing for data subjects. It's quite apparent that Marti Blagborough has not considered this. In particular, he has not considered the next point, Article 64E, which asks that he looks at whether there are appropriate safeguards that could be put in place. He hasn't done so. None of the faces are blurred, for instance. I don't like mentioning an accomplished man, such as Bruce Gilden, in the same breath as a talentless nobody, but it is important to understand that there is a fundamental difference between the two of them, between Bruce Gilden and Marti Blagborough. The chasm between them is narrow but deep. In other words, some of their activities bear a resemblance, but on a closer examination we realise that the difference between the activities of the two of them is deep and fundamental. Bruce Gilden is a serious photographer with guiding values. His work has depth and will be long-lasting. He is trying to convey something to us, and I think he does. His aggressive street photography is carried out within a given context, the bustling streets of New York, where social interaction is impersonal, quick, hurried, and his intrusive street photographic style is an outgrowth of this, forms part of it even, and produces photographs that tell us something about it. His medium is the message. He is from Brooklyn, he knows the place and the people. The style is situated in that hurried, bustling city. Marti Blagborough is, if you like, unknowingly and unwittingly trying to be Bruce Gilden, but in a situation that is totally inappropriate for it, and in a way that is legally questionable. There is no depth to him or his so-called auditing activity. He ignores the law and invents bogus justifications for his abuse of other people. What we're dealing with then is not just a case of the same law being applied differently to different types of activity, but two different cultures and mindsets. The mindset of a photographer starts from a position that is generally respectful of the law and people's rights and dignity. And this forces him into some sort of internal ethical discourse, even if it is only subconscious or culturally inculcated, and in which he has to consider to some extent the law and ethics of what he does. The mind of the auditor disregards this because he thinks he can do what he wants. When the photographer does something wrong, he has to face the consequences as a responsible person must. The auditor treats consequences as an occupational hazard and tries to evade them, even lying and making things up about himself, such as having a limited company when he doesn't. The auditor is doing it for money and invents bogus, cynical justifications for what he does, such as free expression or fighting tyrants and so on. The photographer is earning money from his craft, assuming he's not an amateur. He has no need for justifications. His work speaks for itself. The photographer doesn't need to go around inventing laws to fool and baffle people. He either keeps to the law or doesn't, and generally he doesn't need to worry overly about the detail of the law because he is a generally law-abiding person. All of these differences matter because they add up to completely distinct ways of looking at similar activities. Photography, when done wrong, does sometimes involve abuse of rights, as Naomi Campbell discovered, but it is not based on abusing people's rights. Auditing, in the way it is carried out by Marti Blagborough and others, is based on abusing the rights of others. Auditors are not standing up for the rights of photographers, they are just selfishly serving themselves without regard for anyone else.